Good evening, everybody. I just did a live video in the um, League of Extraordinary Historical Romance Authors where I read a section of my new book, Once a Rake, Always a Rogue, as well as answered some questions and chatted and read a tiny bit, tiny teaser from Eden's Voice too. So if you're interested in that, hop on over into that group. I'm going with this reading thing. Tonight I'm going to read chapters 8 and 9 because chapter 8 is super short. So I'll do a 2 for tonight and then probably back to normal tomorrow. Chapter 8, Bump in the Night. Ida teetered just at the edge of sleep when a thunderous, gravelly snort from across the compartment jerked her fully alert. "Oh, not again," she moaned. The train was luxurious. Fine food and drink, plush upholstery, lavish decor. Comfortable and beautiful. Everything one would hope for from first-class accommodations. Everything except a car free from some sort of snoring beast. After hours listening to croaks and snuffles and snorts, Ida had reached the conclusion that the perpetrator couldn't possibly be human. No man or woman could possibly be so monstrously loud. The snorer shifted or rolled over, or whatever it was that quieted them, and fell silent once more. Ida could only hope this break would last long enough for her to fall into a deep slumber. At least Mr. Masterton had fallen asleep. When she turned in, he'd taken himself off somewhere, not returning until hours later. Since then he'd been tossing and turning, the creaks and groans of the fold-down bunk above her, making her fear he might break something during all his shuffling about, and come crashing down on her. Ida giggled into her pillow, the half-hysterical laugh of someone who had passed beyond tired and into a hazy delirium. Oh, the look on his face when she'd expressed that very concern to him as they observed the conversion of the seating area into beds for the night. "I don't weigh that much," he'd protested. "More than average. You're quite tall and, well, substantial." "I believe these bunks are rather substantial as well." "It's clear, though, that they weren't designed for a man of your stature. You will need to scrunch up your legs to fit. As for your, bulk, I would hope that the beds have been engineered to bear a substantial amount more weight than they are ever expected to hold. A responsible company would have conducted stress tests on all the brackets, especially the connections with the train wall, which is carrying the full load of the bunks and its contents. Or do you think the privacy panels that rise from the back of the seats are at all load-bearing? That could help distribute some of the weight. Regardless, all the hinges appear sturdy, and the welding is superior from what I can see. The hardware up top is too high for me to observe closely." His eyebrows rose. "You've studied engineering?" "Not formally. My father is an engineer. I paid attention." "Of course you did. Well, I can tell you the upper bunk appears quite sound." "To your untrained eye." He leaned closer, his warm breath tickling her ear. "Are you afraid to have me on top of you, Berries?" Ida shivered at the memory. Yes, she absolutely was. Terrified, in fact, because the truth was, she expected she might enjoy the experience altogether too much. When she'd kissed him, it had been with the belief that she would never see him again. She'd snatched one wild moment of freedom and desire. The kiss had set fire to her veins and unleashed a torrent of lust that could never again be shut away. And still, she had been safe. Nothing more could come of it. It would remain only a brief burst of passion with the stranger from the train. Until that dark baritone had spoken in her ear, and she'd looked up into those fiery eyes. All evening she'd relived the taste of his mouth, the scent of his skin, the strength of his body. There were possessions of some sort stuffed inside his coat, suggesting criminal more than card-sharp. Did he carry weapons? Thinking him dangerous only made him more attractive. Of old. He would slay the dragon, take the fair maiden in his arms, and drug her with hot kisses. Run his hand slowly down her spine, before cupping her buttocks, dragging her tight against his hard body. The sound of rushing wind yanked her from her fantasy. Ida levered herself up on one elbow, her eyes searching for the sliver of light where her bed curtains gaped. A moment later, the noise subsided, accompanied by a soft snick of the door latch catching. A tingle of unease crawled up her neck. What purpose could anyone have moving between train cars at this time of night? Her ears strained to catch the muted footfalls, praying they would come to a halt at the lavatory. The washroom in the next car over was probably out of order, and this passenger had need of the facilities. Her trepidation was no more than her fevered imagination assigning him nefarious intentions. The careful steps continued on, with no sound of the lavatory door opening. Ida's palms began to sweat. Her breath caught in her throat as the stranger neared her bunk, and the shadow of a figure appeared through the crack in her curtain. The intruder stopped and turned. Ida shrank back against the wall, her heart threatening to pound its way out of her chest. Her fingers clutched her pillow, prepared to use it as a shield should this man mean her harm. She had no knife, no hatpin, nothing that could serve as a weapon. Even her parasol was packed away with her luggage. Only her own hands and her wit could save her. The intruder didn't bend down or reach for her curtain, and a new fear tore through her mind. Nick! Was this some creditor come to beat him for unpaid debts? Some hostile competitor upon whose criminal territory Nick had encroached? Did it even matter? He was asleep, defenseless. He could be stabbed, poisoned, strangled, and no one would discover the murder until morning. She was his only hope. She sucked in a deep breath and released her loudest, most ear-splitting scream. Chapter 9. The Night Watch. Nick bolted upright so fast he smashed his head on the ceiling. He shouted an obscenity and dropped to the floor in time to see a dark-clothed man bolting from the carriage door. For an instant he remained frozen in indecision. The desire to chase down and pummel the villain raged through him. But what if Barry's were hurt? What if she needed him? Her head popped out of the curtains, her face showing no sign of tears or pain. Nick took off running. He flew out the door, leaping the gap between the train cars and barging through the door, not caring who he woke or disturbed. His legs were miles ahead of his brain. Who the hell was he chasing? Barry's had screamed. That's all he knew. Barry's had screamed, and Nick was going to chase down the villain who had frightened her. His prey was nearly a full carriage length ahead of him, but Nick had a longer stride, and the train was a finite length. He would catch the bastard. If this turned out to be a dream, he was going to feel extraordinarily stupid. He raced into the dining car, stumbling to a halt just in time to avoid impaling himself on an upended chair. The carriage was in a shambles. The door at the far end slammed closed. Nick blinked at the disaster for a moment, his mind at last coming fully awake. The villain, whoever he was no fool. A few seconds' worth of knocking over chairs, and Nick's pursuit had been thwarted. God damn it, he growled, shoving his way through the overturned furniture, his pace slowed to near a crawl. By the time he stepped into the next car, his quarry had vanished. Nick ran one car further before admitting defeat. The man could have ducked into a bunk or hidden himself in a lavatory. He was tall and lean, wearing a dark suit. No distinguishing features. Dozens of men would fit that description. He was well and truly gone. Nick spun and hurried back toward his own bunk, cursing himself for leaving Barry's behind unprotected. The cold, hard floor stung his stockinged feet. As he stepped carefully from one car to the next, the magnitude of his recklessness filled him with shame. One little slip in the darkness, and he would have been crushed beneath the wheels of the train. What had he hoped to accomplish? A dozen brief investigations didn't make him a trained spy or soldier. That man could have had a gun or a knife, or been trained in a deadly martial art. Nick hadn't even remembered to arm himself. His defensive potions sat crammed in the corner of his bunk, unused and unguarded. He'd reacted out of anger and run off on a dangerous, foolish whim, leaving the woman he'd promised to protect alone without so much as a word. He pushed open the door of the carriage, prepared to admit his failure to apprehend the miscreant and apologize for not seeking to her needs. "How dare you, sir?" Nick staggered to a halt. There she stood, with her back to him and hands on her hips, staring down an older gentleman while curious neighbors peeked out from their bunks. "I have already explained the reasons for the disturbance," she continued, "and while I dislike that it had to happen, I won't apologize for it. You have no right to put your own desire to sleep above the safety of every person aboard this vehicle. I scared off a suspicious and potentially dangerous intruder, and to imply that I would have been better served to leave him to do harm is appallingly selfish and patronizing." Nick stepped up behind her, letting his hand brush at hers. "Trouble, my sweet?" She whirled and threw her arms around him. "Nick, I was so worried. Did you catch him?" "I'm afraid not, but never mind that. How are you?" "I'm well, thank you." "That's more than the rest of us can say," the irritable man snarled, "wakening the entire car with your hysterical screams." "Her screams weren't near as bad as your snoring," a woman's voice called from behind a curtain. "That's not the half of it," the man continued, "refusing me an apology, stomping up and down the aisle in nothing but a nightgown, tormenting respectable people with her shameless behavior." "Shut your mouth," Nick commanded in his deepest, most lordly voice. "You will apologize to my wife and return to your bed, now." She stiffened in his arms. He would beg her pardon for the lie once they were off this blasted train. For now it seemed the best way to safeguard her reputation, given their mutual state of undress and the way she had flung herself at him. He hugged her protectively to his chest and glared at Sir Snores-a-Lot until he took himself back to bed in a huff. He hadn't apologized, but he wouldn't be bothering her anymore. Nick sat down on her bunk and pulled her down to sit beside him, holding her hand in silence while their fellow passengers closed curtains and returned to their places for the remainder of the night. When the noise died down, he slid all the way into her bed, propping himself up against the wall and drawing her into his lap. She settled herself comfortably, her head falling back onto his chest. Nick rubbed a lock of golden hair between his thumb and forefinger. "Tell me what happened," he whispered. "That man entered our carriage and came to stand before our bed, spacing you. Having had a bit of time to think on it, it's possible he was searching for something. In the moment, all I could think was that he meant you harm, so I screamed." "Thank you for your concern and your quick thinking. I'm relieved to hear he didn't attack you in any way." "No, indeed. I'm certain he was here for you. Have you done something illegal? Angered the wrong sort of person?" "Not that I'm aware of." Nick bit his lower lip, contemplating her words. He couldn't recall doing anything out of the ordinary. He had nothing of particular value with him. He had no real enemies he knew of, and he could think of no reason for anyone to follow him on a mere fact-finding mission. He'd assumed the man had been after her, thinking her unprotected and perhaps in possession of money or jewels. If only Nick hadn't bungled the chase. Now they would never know the villain's true purpose. "I know you carry something concealed in your coat. Weapons? Valuables? Something that might be worth stealing?" "Potions." He didn't elaborate, not wishing to dwell on the various items that made up his travel kit. Too many of them were drinkable, and the cravings had been gnawing at him since drinking Elle's potent concoction. And then there was the little toy he kept perpetually in his trunk, or in his left front pocket. Difficult to explain. She interpreted his silence as displeasure with her. "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't pry. We promised no questions." "A decision I've come to regret. Perhaps in the morning we might reevaluate the situation." "Yes, perhaps." She yawned, her body sagging against his. Nick tugged the bedding up and over her. "Sleep, Berries. I will keep you safe." "Yes, but—" Another yawn. "Who will keep you safe?" He pressed a kiss into her hair. "Who indeed?" Ruffians aside, he felt safe here, holding her close, breathing in her subtle sweet perfume, basking in the warmth of their entwined bodies. He toyed with her hair while she drifted off to sleep in his embrace. He would wait up the remainder of the night, acting the concerned husband he had claimed to be. Never mind that they'd only just met and he still didn't know her real name. He would be her guardian, the way she had been his. And while he drew breath, he would allow no harm to come to her. And that was chapter 8 and 9. Good night, everybody.